All right, welcome everybody. We are in the 15th chapter of the book of Matthew, and our subdeacon Michael Pagani is going to be leading us in our Bible study for the first half of our session. And then the second half, we will be talking about iconography, all we ever wanted to know about iconography in one session by Deacon Zach. But I'm sure he'll come back. So let's say our prayer for today, and we'll start by continuing to join in together and celebrate the resurrection. Let God arise, let his enemies be scattered, and let those who hate him flee from before his face. Christ
is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing light.
As smoke vanishes, so let them vanish away. As wax melts before the fire, Masih
قام من بين الأموات ووتي الموت بالموت ووهب الحياة للذين في القبور.
So let the sinners perish before the face of God, and let the righteous rejoice.
Christos anesti ek nekron thanato, thanaton patisas, ketis endis mimas izoin charisameno.
This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it.
Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life.
Illumine our hearts, O Master, who lovest mankind with the pure light of your divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our mind to the understanding of your gospel teachings. Plant in us also the fear of thy blessed commandments, that trampling down all carnal desires, we may enter upon a spiritual manner of living, both thinking and doing such things as is well-pleasing unto thee. For thou art the illumination of our souls and bodies, O Christ our God, and unto thee do we ascribe glory together with thy Father from everlasting, and thine all holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and ever, and unto ages of ages.
Amen.
Amen. Welcome. We're glad you're with us. Please be seated.
Shall I sit here, Jim? I'm fine. Okay.
Good evening. Tonight we're going to take a rather deep dive into Matthew 15. So before we get started, I'm going to kind of do what they do in all these new shows you have. You say, before they get into the main chapter, you say, previously on. So we're going to do a little revision, because at chapter 15, we're like in the middle, we're like on the dead set in the middle of Matthew. And in doing that, we also see Christ like fully out there. I mean, he's not hiding anymore. He's not in the back corners going, yes, I did this to you, don't tell anybody you're healed. He's not doing that anymore. He's just out there, and he's just addressing everybody, to include the Pharisees, to include Jews, and now we're going to see in this chapter really focusing on the Gentiles, because he actually decides that not only he's tired of the Pharisees, Sadducees, and he wants to now be able to go to people that have a relationship with him, and it's just not to the Jews. So we're going to start with chapter 15, and there are basically 4 stories in this one chapter. And the first one is the conflict of cleanliness, and that goes deep too. Then we have the Gentiles of great faith. Then we have the healing among the Gentiles. And then the last one is the feeding of the 4,000. Specifically, what I want you to realize, and maybe not everybody realizes this, but this is the second feeding of the multitudes. A lot of people know about the 5 loaves and 2 fish. But that was mostly in the previous chapter when we read about it, he was ministering mostly to the Jewish enclaves, people that were around the area. Now he's going to go out, it's different, it's a different feeding, he's going to go out and he's going to do 4,000 feet. He's going to feed 4,000 instead of 5,000. And we'll get into that. But that's mostly to the Gentiles. And you can tell that by geographical locations. So we're going to look at all these different subtexts as we go through this one chapter. The first thing we look at is in chapter 15, verse 1, which says, "Then," and this is after he's done all these great and mighty things, "the scribes and the Pharisees, who were from Jerusalem, came to see Jesus, saying," now, you got to remember that there are, Sadducees and Pharisees everywhere, but these guys from the hometown, they were from like the big, big time. They came out from Jerusalem just to be able to see Jesus, because he's really not hiding anymore. And so they say to him, "Why do your disciples," in verse 2, "why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread." Now, that's true. And if you realize that most of Judaic law is the combination of good practical living to be able to keep people from dying, and also scripture. It's all one big mix. For example, not eating pork. Everybody knows Jews aren't supposed to eat pork. Well, mostly the reason why it's unclean is because of what we call trichinosis, which is a parasite and a bacteria that basically can kill you. So they say don't eat it. That was a Jewish law, and it became codified so much that, like all these other laws, they made, I'm so good because I don't eat pork, I abstain from pork, I'm good. But that's really not the intention of that. And Christ knows this, so he answers them, and you can kind of see where he's not letting anybody off the hook anymore. He says, verse 3, "And he answered and said to them, Why do you also transgress the commandments of God because of your tradition?" Then he says, quote, "For God commands, saying, Honor your father and your mother, and he who curses the father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, Whoever says to his father and mother, Whatever profits you might have received from me is a gift to God. Then he need not honor his father and his mother. Thus you have made the commandment of God to no effect by your tradition. Hypocrites." Verse 7. "Well did Isaiah prophecy say about you, saying," quote from Isaiah, "These people draw near to me with their mouths and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching a doctrine that's the commandment of men." Now, if you notice about this, and this is going to be the main point that Christ is going to be making, he is talking about a relationship. He's not talking about a habit. He's talking about a relationship. Their hearts are far from me. And that's an indication of where the heart of these Pharisees and Sadducees are. They're not with God. They're with these laws of men that are mixed up in these Judaic laws. And then he says in verse 10, "When he had called the multitudes to himself," now we're talking about a lot of people, "he said to them, Hear and understand," verse 11, "Not what goes into the mouth defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth that defiles a man." Okay, so what does that mean? Well, I teach biology, and one of the things that I have to teach my biology students is what is known as heterotrophic, which is different from autotrophic. Autotrophic means you get your own food. You eat your own food and you make your own food. Plants are heterotrophic. Anything that's an animal is heterotrophic and has to consume something else to live. So God made a world that you can take a material, you can consume it, and you can draw life from it. so the body knows how to take life from other things. So he's saying here that it's not what goes into the mouth, not what you eat, it's what comes out. Then his disciples, verse 12, then his disciples came and said to him, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard that saying? He's like, I don't think the disciples really got Jesus at this point. And a lot of this is about belief and disbelief. It's about the relationship with Christ. And so Jesus is working with his disciples, and he says in verse 13, but he answers saying, every plant which my heavenly Father has not planted will be uprooted. Let them alone. They that blind lead the blind, and if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into the ditch. So he is basically telling them, that if you don't know Christ, if you don't know me, you're not going to be able to find your way. Now Peter, always like Peter in these scriptures, then Peter answered him saying in verse 15, explain the parable to us. So he's doing it for two reasons. He's going, you're making people mad, so why don't you explain it a little better so people won't be so mad? So Jesus says, are you still without understanding? Then he goes ahead in compassion. Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? But those things which proceed from the mouth come from the heart, and they defile man. For out of the heart proceeds evil thoughts. Now this is very important. We're going to go back to this word evil right now. But look what he's being very specific. This isn't a general parable. This is very specific. For out of the heart, verse 19, proceeds evil thoughts, murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. Now, I got a question for everybody here. What do the following things that proceed from the heart have in common? Murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, and blasphemy. What do they all have in common?
Sins.
Well, they're sins, but why are they sins?
Very selfish. I mean, for me.
Selfish, yes. That's underneath the line. Selfish. Selfish, which means that in order to do any of these things, you have to be in a relationship with somebody or something to do them. Fornication is a relationship. You have to murder somebody. You have to be in a relationship. You have to be a relationship. And the last one here, blasphemy, you have to be in a relationship with God. So this is the new covenants that he's talking about. It's not about making laws to be able to guardrails to keep us from falling into the ditch, like don't eat pork because you'll die, but it's the relationship with God. It is all about not bringing out evil thoughts. Now, Orthodoxy has a lot of theology about this, and I'm not going to touch on this. I think Father Jim would probably be a better person to talk more thoroughly about this. But in Orthodoxy, we don't believe that the world is evil. We believe that the earth was created by God, and that God is in all things. But it's the things that come out of the heart that are evil. That's the only place that evil actually arises. And that the rest of the world, we're not in this thing, the world is enmity against God. Even in Romans, when they talk about enmity against God, it's thought. That's enmity against God. In Romans 8, it's thought. It's not the body. The body itself, as he indicates here, purifies. I mean, if you go back, he says,
Number 17, do you not understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile men. So it's in this particular thing we have a look at a new set of laws that is based upon a covenant with Christ, a relationship. And that's what he's talking about here. And I have some notes here if you want to look at them. One of the things that we're going to be looking at is, now that we have this relationship and Christ is saying, let's talk, he says, you know, what I need to do is I need to get away from these Pharisees and Sadducees. I am going to go way north. And if on the back of your sheet you'll have a map. So I kind of want you to turn to the back of the map if you got this. Anybody? And so in verse 21, we say, then Jesus went out there and departed to the region of Tyrus and Sidon. Now, if you realize this, if he was anywhere in this area here, I mean, if we looked back at chapter 14, the last place we know that he was is Gennesaret, and I'm not too sure where Gennesaret. Anybody know where Gennesaret is?
It's across from the Sea of Galilee.
It's across from the Sea of Galilee on the west side.
Map.
Okay, so
It's east.
it's east. Okay, right, all right. So he decides that he's going to get out from there. And now if you look at it, if you look at this map, you can notice that he goes to Tyre. And if you look, that is actually a long way to walk. It's about he has to head west and north. And he has to go around the Sea of Galilee, he has to go all the way up, has to go past Lower Galilee, Upper Galilee, and enter into Lebanon, basically. So this next section is about Christ's ministry to the eventual Church of Antioch. That's the area that he's going. He's going way north. He's getting out of his comfort zone of being with the Jewish people who he came to serve. Now, and there's another thing about it. He went back in Matthew 7, he talks about don't throw pearls before swines, right? So he can't be throwing things out to people who are below him, right? But he goes up here. He goes way into Lebanon, starts his ministry to the eventual Church of Antioch, and he says, and behold, a woman of Canaan, which means somebody that's down, she was from the Israel area, came from the region and cried out to him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord. She's not Jewish, son of David, recognizing his kingship. This is somebody who isn't Jewish. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. Christ says, but answered her not a word. And the disciples came and urged him, saying, send her away, for she cries out after us too. So, we're not supposed to be serving these Gentiles. We're supposed to be serving the Jews. But he answered and said, I was not sent except to those lost sheep of the house of Israel, reinforcing the fact that he was coming to Israel, not to anybody else, right? Then, chapter 25, then she came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me, asking. But he answered and said, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Sounds like a test to me. And she said, yes, Lord. Yet even the little dogs eat the crumbs which fall from their master's table. She's already realizing that she is in this position of subservience, but she still doesn't have the ego that the Pharisees and Sadducees had. and she knows that he is Lord. She has faith. So he says, then Jesus says and said, and this is verse 28, then Jesus answered and said to her, O woman, great is your faith. Let it be to you as you desire. So here's the thing. It's faith. It's not whether your bloodline. This is the establishment of when we understand that Christ was to the whole world. He didn't just keep it to the Jews. He made it a point to go up into where he knows that there are mostly Arabs, but not Jews. And he is talking to them. And now she's found this faith. He established it. Then, after...
Can I say something, though?
Please.
Don't you think there's a contrast here also between how he was talking to the scribes and Pharisees about the lack of humility, really, I mean, their arrogance, and then he talks to this woman, so there's a contrast that Matthew is, I think, playing on here. The pride of an arrogance and the following not of God's law, natural law, but of their own man-made law, or I'm trying to say the action of God's law, their interpretation of it. I mean, they were interpreting it came from God, but the way that they were living that law, and he called them hypocrites. And then he sees this girl and says, great is your faith, and he called the other ones hypocrites. So there's this contrast from this arrogant way of living and using these laws for your own selfish reasons, and then this woman who called herself a dog, she said, they're the master, I'm just the dog. Very humble, a very a humble way of seeing yourself compared to this. It's striking me just now for the first time. There's this contrast in what in these two stories of the pride of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the humility and the great faith that has to do with humility. This is a common theme that we've been seeing throughout Matthew. This common theme of humility. So I think it's probably very intentional that Matthew laid it out this way.
Well, the first part when he's giving all his Beatitudes and he's giving all the, parables, we celebrate the week of the Pharisees and the publican, which is this story coming to life. This chapter, here it is, boom. He's, oh, I'm so great, I wash my hands, which is really a good law. I mean, how many times during the pandemic we say, wash your hands,
We've learned that over the last couple
right?
years.
But, they thought that made it all good, So yeah, it's the same thing. So now, after healing this one woman, so like the floodgates open, all right, because now we have in chapter 15, verse 29, if you're trying to keep along, Jesus departed from there. I love this word, skirted the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so that's about a 70-hour walk back down to Tyre, back to the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is an interesting body of water. It's fresh water, but it's the second lowest lake in the world. Of course, the lowest is the Dead Sea. But here it is. He skirts along this area. And so if you think you're going to walk 70 hours all the way down, don't you think you kind of would pull a big crowd? People want to see you as you go. So he's getting huge numbers in his presence, Well, we found out 4,000 later on, and women and children. But then he says, and went down upon the mountain and sat there. Now, if you look on the map, you can see Mount Tabor, just a little to the south of the lake, southeast of the Sea of Galilee. You see Mount Moron, you see all these great mountains that later on, but that's not the mountain that he's talking about. The mountain he's talking about if you said the Sea of Galilee and he went to the mountain, anybody who had ever visited the Bible land, which Father Jim is going to do, and maybe it would be great for you to do this because you can do this, anywhere along the bank of the Galilee, you can see Mount Arbel, which is like a big Ephesus in this southeast corner. It's a big mountain. So he comes all the way around, and everybody knows this place because it's beautiful, it's fresh water, everybody's there. It's like, this is the big thing. It's like the festival is happening. And he says, then the multitudes came to him. Now that's a long way up, by the way, up that mountain. It's a very steep hill, by the way. And if you go and see the Holy Lands with Father Jim, you'll see that in itself.
I've already seen it. I've been there.
He's been there. You can see that. You can see how it's a tough walk. So if you got to get to the top, and he went there and he sat down, and the multitudes came to him, having with them the lame, the blind, the mute, the maimed, and many others, and he laid them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. Now, irrespective of person, I'm sure most of these were Arabic. Most of these probably weren't Jewish, because this is the land of this is pretty much, a melting pot area, but it's probably more Arabic than anything else right now he's tending to, not Jews. And then verse 31, he says, so the multitude marveled when they saw the mute speak, the maimed made whole, the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. The glorified God of Israel. These are people, the Arabics, that weren't Jews, but they were worshiping the God of Israel because he was in relationship with them, basically. Somebody comes to you, he was without respect of a person. He didn't ask, are you Jew or Arabic? No, he healed them. So now on verse 32, we have now. Usually that means, okay, now that's over with. Now we're starting another, section. But really he's in the same area, same mountain. He says, now Jesus called his disciples to himself and said, I have compassion on the multitude, relationship, because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. Now that means that 3 days, that means they're coming down from Tyre with him. I do not want to send them away hungry, lest they faint on the way. Compassion. Then the disciples said to him, where could we get enough bread in the wilderness to fill such a great multitude? Now they just did 5,000, just, maybe a month ago? I don't know. And they're going, where are we going to get the material? I don't think the disciples really had a handle on it yet. Jesus said to them, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7, and a few little fish. So he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the ground. That's authority. The king is giving authority. And he took the 7 loaves and fish and gave thanks, broke them and gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the multitude. Once again, feeding. So they all ate and were filled. Verse 37. And they took up 7 large baskets full of fragments that were left. Now, you can get into 7 being a perfect number and all that, and you can have the argument, well, there were more left over after the 5,000. Why? It was, but I think mostly what you have to remember is the relationship. He actually, and this is actually a kingship, he actually created matter out of nothing, which no one can do except God. That is a miracle. He had bread, he started with that, but he created it from nothing. And he fed everybody. A witness of 4,000. It says, verse 38, now those who ate were 4,000 men. besides women and children. So that's probably 85,000, I don't know. Now, this is actually, there's a lot in this last verse, so we're going to tease this apart. It says, "And he sent the multitudes, got into a boat, and came to the region of Magdala." Now, where this particular mountain is located is right next to the south. If you look down here, you see where Tiberias is, and can everybody see the map? Everybody looking at the map? So if you look at it, you have on the southeast corner, you'll see Tiberias. And just if you were to draw a line just a little east, that's where this Mount Abor is. So he sent all these people away that had been gathering for 3 days, right? And he goes into a boat, and then he goes to Magdala. Well, this is really good. In order to get rid of the masses, he got in a boat where they couldn't follow and went out into the ocean and just went up the river just a bit and landed on the same side of the river so that he could get away from them. I think it's very cute. He said, "Okay, bye. Okay, you're following me. I get in a boat." He goes out into the ocean, comes back around and goes about a half a mile upstream and lands in Magdala, which is also where Mary Magdalene came from, because Mary Magdalene. So that's actually that story. Now, so that's one chapter, and that's a huge chapter because it's setting the story of this conflict. And next week when we get to chapter 16, we're going to talk about the Jewish leaders testing Jesus and the false doctrine. So he's going to go right back into with these Pharisees and Sadducees in 16, and he's going to declare himself more about who he really is. And Matthew is all about the king, you know. If you look at Matthew 27, it says, "Who are you? Are you the king of Jews?" They put a sign of him, the king of Jews. Matthew is big on showing that he is the king, he is God. So that's going to be in the next chapter. But that's where we're going to stop there in chapter 15, and then we're going to take a 5-minute break and let Deacon Zach, come forward and give something that I think is amazing in our church and is just for worship, and that is the use of iconography as a means of worship in a way that we live as Orthodox.
Thank you. So I'm really a student of iconography overall. Michael invited me and Father Jim to the group to not really discuss, to preach or to teach, but just to kind of open up a topic where we could all, if we had questions about icons in the church, the way they're made or the way that they appear, now would be a good time to open up a discussion about that, I think. I have some slides with me which show older icons, which is something I did want to talk about, but moreover just kind of see where people are at and how we're gonna talk about this. Instead of me reading from the theology of the icon, we could talk about it. So, did you have anything pressing right away that you needed to get to? You said you had some questions prepared. Is there anything you really wanted to know right away, needed to know?
Oh, well, the form of iconography is always looks two-dimensional to me. I mean, if you go to Russia, it's all like three-dimensional Raphael stuff. If you go to, any sort of Western church, if you go to Sistine Chapel, you got this, three-dimensional look, but all our icons look like they're two-dimensional. Why is that?
Well, it technically isn't two-dimensional. The icon's purpose is to show that which cannot be shown. The three dimensions you see in other churches, in Western art, is from a different perspective, and it was a type of art that was formed, let's say, in the 15th, 16th century. In our church, even the icons that we have, a good icon is always painted, and if you painted with depth. So it may appear flat But if you look at good Orthodox icons, you can always tell that there's a depth there that is portrayed, which takes the viewer into a different space than they would be if they were looking at a regular picture. Icons technically, in my understanding, are not necessarily art. They're an artistic form. They're practiced by people who are skilled in the arts. But they're not necessarily something beautiful made for this purpose, like a sculpture. Yet at the same time, because we have patterns in a specific style, doesn't mean that there's no room for any creativity at all. There's a roundabout way of talking about what you had asked. Perspective is a big issue. A general art term for anyone, perspective is, if you think of a landscape and the way a landscape is painted, there's lines that we have. Let's take, for instance, in this room. So in order to show that something is far away and that it's within a certain space, the lines go to a certain, called a vanishing point. Everything's designed on that. So if you are the viewer and you are standing there and this is your room, all these lines go towards this vanishing point. Iconography, good iconography, being different, I'm drawing this upside down, than Western art, uses something which is referred to sometimes as inverse perspective, which its primary goal is to bring the viewer into communion with the person that's depicted. Whereas in Western art, things are seen as through a window. Some people call icons window into heaven. That's not correct. That's actually wrong. Because it's not something that's taking place outside of our sphere. It's happening right now, just in the divine liturgy. When the bread is offered, the wine is offered, becomes the body and blood of Christ. That is happening at the Last Supper at the same time as it's happening now. So these things take place within the same space.
I heard one time that, and we do call them windows to heaven, because when we see it, we're supposed to be drawn into heaven. We're supposed to be thinking of heaven, right? Which is now, which is present with us. But it's more like heaven looking at us, because the perspective is different. Their vantage, if you were in heaven looking out, their vantage point, and you can see this in the buildings. Sometimes they have these buildings that look strange to us because they're reversed. The big end is far, and the small end is close to us in iconography. It's like a reversal. So it's almost like heaven is actually looking at us, or we are participating in that mystical space now. And so you're right. I don't know why we call them windows to heaven, but it's supposed to draw our attention to heaven. Right. But this is the way because I asked one time, why do the buildings look out of proportion? Because we're seeing something that is otherworldly. I think that's the way it was explained to me. And so those buildings are, what did you call it? Reverse proportioned. So it's supposed to look that way for a reason. And the hands, sometimes the hands are like they're longer than we normally would see a photo or an image that is three-dimensional, or just a photo of the world, something in the world. The hands are a little different. The toes are always, sometimes it looks like they have two left feet or something in iconography, but it's like out of proportion because it's supposed to be otherworldly. Is that right?
In some ways, in my understanding, that is. In some ways, it's not.
Okay.
It's getting there. It's everything in the icon is meant. Yes, they're out of what we would normally perceive as a building or a rock or a shoe or something on someone, but that's all to bring that not as something that's happening looking at you, but something you are participating in. So kind of like being enveloped by the image, as it were. Rocks are like that. If you look at the rocks outside of the resurrection, when Christ goes down to break down the bonds of hell, the rocks all seem to curve like this. Many good icons are like that. But that is its primary purpose, and that's done. Okay, so there are some that are done well that way, and some that are not. And I guess as a rule of thumb, if it invites you to prayer, it's probably better than anything else, right? So in a sense, yeah, that perspective is there specifically to envelop the viewer and for you to be a part of that. I think that's the important point.
I remember hearing Father Michael Butler on one of our Orthodox radio programs. He said exactly what you said, that he says, we always say they're called windows to heaven. They're not. And I think originally we always thought we see icons and we're supposed to feel like we're walking into heaven. I used to say that when I was giving church tours, and you say all these icons, when you walk in, you're like walking into heaven. You can see Christ, you can see Mary, you can see all the saints. But I think that was what Father Michael said, which makes total sense. It's not necessarily only a window that you can only see. Like if we're walking by a house and we look at a window in a house, the window through the house, you can see, but you're not going to interact with them. You're not going to be in communion with them. You're just looking at it from afar. He said that's exactly not what we're supposed to do with icons in the church. You have a communion with it. So he said it's more like a door. You actually walk into it so you can be in communion with who is there and the kingdom.
That's good.
It was one of the Orthodox radio programs, and I kept listening to that over and over, so I try to remember it. Yeah, but that makes sense.
Yeah,
That
I
it's
agree
not
with
just to look at as if you have no interaction with. But he said, yeah, it's because you can have interaction with it. So it's like a door that you can go through and you venerate, you kiss Christ. You know, you kiss the Virgin Mary, you venerate the saints, you venerate the feasts and celebrate.
So they are designed this way for us to look at them, and then for the exact reverse. So there's a meeting there.
Just as you and I are having a conversation
Yeah,
now.
Right.
That's cool. Wow.
And Christ is in our midst. He is now. This is real. The heavenly
Yes.
kingdom is real. It's hard to say that to people who aren't Orthodox or maybe have never been in an Orthodox church. Oh, God's here. He's here.
And the fact that you can have a weeping icon and try to describe that or explain that to people, how is that even possible? That God interacts with us through the icon itself. How does that happen? It's like fascinating.
How does God interact with us through the icon?
No, I'm not really asking how, but it's through a miracle that the myrrh will come through the eyes of the Virgin
Oh,
Mary.
the miracle.
so,
Yeah.
But to
How
us,
did Jesus feed 5,000?
yeah.
With 5 loaves
Yeah.
of bread, 4,000 with 7 loaves. How do icons weep? It's just bizarre.
Yeah.
It's out of our understanding. These are miracles, I think.
So to further show my ignorance because I'm Western influence, I always thought the point of art was to be able to transform you to another place. To be able to take you someplace higher. But what you're telling me is iconography is to bring us into the present moment
Yes, the eternal as it is now.
as it is now.
Yeah.
Nowhere else but here.
You and I sitting here, the same
Yeah.
thing. The saints are just alive now as you and I are talking.
Yeah.
See what he said? The eternal, that's always there now, right here in front of us.
Yes.
So when we
I
say
like that.
otherworldly, this is a good description.
In a sense, yeah, if that works, yeah.
I mean, I've heard this before. Just
Yeah.
like Chris, we've heard these things, and I have to give tours of our church all the time.
Right.
And so I use some of this terminology, but I like this, I ask people, have you ever heard the phrase windows to heaven? So this is what we're experiencing here. But I like that doorway to heaven.
That was Father Michael.
Good.
I love what
and
he
it's
said.
one of those new,
Yeah.
those new shower doors that swing both ways.
Mhm.
They're coming in,
Yeah.
we're coming in, and it's a communion.
And,
I love that.
and sometimes too, it's you have to say I'm not a stickler for that. You have to tell people that maybe are unfamiliar, that's a window into heaven, and just leave it there. If that's more
It's a
comfortable
start,
for them,
I guess,
it's a
yeah.
start. Yeah,
Well, I'm taking it to the next level.
Yeah.
My next tour.
yeah.
I love that a lot. I'll see what I can do with it.
So that's it. Yeah, that's primarily the difference. There is a difference. I wouldn't say one is worse or one is better than, but I think there is definitely a difference between the way the Byzantines. Now, when I am talking about the way that I was taught, when I'm talking about good or better iconography, it's taken from the Paleologue, so 14th, 15th century Byzantine icons. That was very influential in a number of ways, that it happened almost how many few hundred years after the Seventh Ecumenical Council, which was really kind of the nail in we are putting icons, this is what we do, this is us, this is orthodoxy. But they were able to, let's say, perfect it in a way which communicated these theological truths to the viewer. So, taking from the Paleolog, there's a specific way that they would design them, construct them, points of reference when you start making an icon to get that perspective and to communicate that reality to the viewer. And not only is it through the construction of the icon, but also through the color of the icon, which we can talk about now or on another night too. We can go into that. There's a lot to kind of go into. But I think to start, at least to begin, when you're taking these people into a church for the first time, to start is to talk about rhythm. Now, you said that like art is made to, and Western art is to make something beautiful, to take you to that, to portray that for you, to sort of remind you of that. And that does have some merit, I think, in iconography too, because we're using things like good line work. We're using things like proper proportions. So someone doesn't come out with a hand that's huge and another hand that's like very small. Maybe sometimes you see older icons and the iconographer had 2 left feet, as a mistake. I've even seen an icon of St. Seraphim, very famous, very decent icon, but he actually has 5 fingers. Because of the way, there's a specific way you draw the hand, and the iconographer was just copying. A little bit about rhythm and about the way that we start. When we start painting icons, we have to start with drawing. To anyone interested in iconography, drawing is the most important thing. You go to painting courses in landscape painting, Western style, they teach you that. You have to know how to draw in order to learn how to paint. I had a teacher once that told me, I won't start teaching you painting until you've drawn 100 icons. So I had to make a stack. And then we went over and corrected them. And then we went over and corrected them again. You're always drawing. An artist is always drawing. An iconographer is too. So similar in that way. Quickly, I'm not sure how much time we have, as always. I put some slides together. Maybe they're not too easy to see from here. Maybe I'll show them next week. I had planned on mentioning too, that sometimes in Orthodox circles you hear people say that icons are written. And this is a mistranslation of the Greek. So just say they're painted. Some people like to say that because the word in Greek can mean drawing and or painting. So there's a little bit of leeway there.
What's the word? Icon?
Graphean, which means
Graphean.
to sort of paint or write something with a brush or with a pencil or with a rock or something. So it sounds good. It sounds neat. It sounds like something that we own, but actually it's kind of incorrect. Stickling point.
That icons originated because people of that era did not know how to read or write, and the icons were created and were called written because they were telling the story of Christ's life. These pictures that the icons portrayed were written so people could look at it and understand it even though they couldn't read.
So the gospel in color.
Pardon me?
The gospel in color.
Yeah.
Or word pictures. I've heard that. Icons described as that also.
Medieval art. Yeah, that's how it was back then, before people were fully literate.
So when you are asked to draw, right?
Yes. Yes.
An icon.
Yes.
Let's say maybe St. Christopher, because he was just yesterday. So how would you know how to draw? Is there a book, or is there a way that you have to say, okay, St. Christopher has this, this, and this? Because all the icons of St. Christopher, I have 4 of them. All the ones I have, he's holding a branch, a very large branch with leaves coming up, and obviously Christ on his shoulder. But all of them have him holding this.
Mm-hmm.
So is there something where you go to that you have to see, okay, what is proper for this icon, and how, is there something like that?
First, you go to the good icons. So something that's well painted, that's, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be old, but something that's been painted for, and then painted and copied for, almost 1,000 years or whatever the case may
Wow,
be.
yeah.
There are symbols within the icon. The icon itself is not a symbol. But there are certain things that if they're holding, like the icons in our church, the iconography, that indicate who that is. In case you didn't know how to read or couldn't see it, you could tell that that was the prophet Daniel because he had the little hat, or St. Christopher because he was carrying the, It's good to be sober with those things too, because at times there are little folk isms, as we know in Orthodox Church or in Christianity, which pop in, which can make it less of an icon than it should be, less proper. So for instance, in Russia, for a very long time, there were actually icons of St. Christopher that they had a dog head.
Showed a dog face,
right? The
right.
dog face.
Yeah.
Because there was some type of superstition or something that came in. Or,
That he
I
was
had-
real hideous to look at.
right, and so that they were, portraying it as a dog, which I kind of myself like dogs, but I'm not sure why they chose a dog. But, so, and I,
He wasn't considered a handsome man, or what are they trying to do?
I don't know, they said he was really hard, and they say that's incorrect to do that. It's not according to Orthodox teaching, that you should not
Right.
do it that way. Just because somebody made a comment, or maybe it became a folklore or legend or something.
Yeah,
that
like a
he was
superstition or
hideous
something.
I don't know, that's.
Is it
That's
is it a
actually, I think,
betrayal
in the
of his
Horologian.
righteousness or his purity
No,
or
it's
something
just
that
his
it's hard-
physical appearance
Oh,
was
so he
hard to
just-
look at,
Oh,
just his, yeah.
yeah.
But that's in the Horologian, where they write up from HTM, Holy Transfiguration. Yeah.
It's true.
interesting.
So there are ways that you do that. You go back by looking at the old icons. The most important thing is, to an iconographer, is to not just copy, trace. You almost never trace things when you're starting out a little bit, but you have to learn the structure beneath it so you further understand what that is communicating, that figure is communicating. Obviously, most of the saints that we see in the icons in the church wear Roman-style clothing or Greek-style clothing. You don't see that changing much. It would kind of be ridiculous if it did. You wouldn't want to see someone in a members-only jacket or something, which would be, it would go beyond what you're trying to portray. So that's what I would do. Yeah, go back to the old icons and go from there. Yeah.
Okay.
As like source material, basically.
Yes.
When you're creating something like that.
Yep, source material. And there are some books. There are, the iconographer has, there's a book that was written in the 15th century that just is a very long list of how they used to make paints and plaster and lime and how they did everything.
Like a recipe book or something.
Kind of, yeah, a little bit. And there's a whole list of, Saint such and such has this in his hand and a diminutive beard, or has a big beard, or, so you can kind of rely on that a little bit, but I think that was probably meant for people that literally had no other, they couldn't go to Russia, if they were in Greece to look at. So, source material.
So why don't you tell us about the different mediums that you use to make icons, to paint?
Yeah, well, I primarily use egg tempera, which is paint made from egg yolk. I've also used acrylics before. Acrylics are common. Much less common are oil paints. And and that's about it. So acrylics and egg tempera.
What would be the difference or purpose of using one or the other? I mean, I don't know. I've heard of them. I have no idea what even the difference really is.
Sure. At some point in time, I could probably bring paints in and we could compare and put them on just to show. But the style of painting iconography came from, it developed a very long time before acrylic paint was invented or made. So that's just kind of in keeping with, I guess, the purest way to do it as some people paint. What it also does is it actually dries very hard. So because of the proteins, the albumin, I forget, in the yolk, it actually gets into the surface that you have, the gesso panel that you start with, And as it ages, it soaks all those colors into the wood, becomes part of that. So almost like an epoxy or something you put into a wooden joint.
Does it infuse into the medium?
Somewhat, yeah. It basically becomes a part. Let's just say it adheres well to the chalk and the gesso. Like if you have a cup of coffee and you spill it on concrete and the sun comes out and bakes it, sometimes it just, there's the coffee stain. So it bakes in like that. Acrylics kind of do that, but acrylics are plastic. So the plastic sits on top of the surface. And it's permanent for the most part, but more permanent would be that paint, the egg temper that gets into the gesso and stays there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's mixed with, basically with earth pigments. So powders that come from clay, basically, and other minerals that are crushed and made very small. And that disperses those minerals or pigments into the paint in a more rich way that I think is probably more vivid if you do it correctly. In some ways, it should be simple too. So, I mean, you have to, some icons I've decided I should do with acrylic because they have to be up on a wall or they have to go outside, so they're going to be more permanent. A lot of iconographers, like not George Cordy's, who's doing the iconography? Blasius.
Yeah, so it's on his.
Many iconographers do an acrylic painting on canvas and then put it on the wall, as opposed to putting it on traditionally, because it lasts longer and is more permanent. Yeah.
So I have a question regarding that.
Yes.
Putting canvas on the wall. I get this question a lot. Is there a more pure form of iconography? Is there an intention, of doing the iconography directly on the wall, or are there some parts of it that traditionally are actually on the wall? Because I know Vlasios does. There's a lot of that that's on the wall.
On the wall.
And then some of, like, the figures are mostly the canvas. So I have that question, but then I also get the question of how in the world do icons stay so long on the wall if they're just canvas?
Really good glue.
Historic. That's what I say.
Yeah, it's really good glue.
I said, I asked him
Yeah.
once and he said, very good glue.
Yeah,
Very strong glue.
it's very
It's like
strong.
he's creating his own wallpaper almost.
Yep.
But then is there this,
Yeah.
then is there a blending, oh yeah, like wallpaper, but wallpaper peels. I mean, do icons peel historically? It seems like they never come down.
I mean,
But-
depends, like sometimes you see wallpaper.
But there's
in there.
also like a blending of these, the canvas into, because you can't ever see the creases.
Right.
So what's that all about? I mean, how's
That's
that?
magic. It's a magic touch. He's a very skilled iconographer and is able to undertake a large job like that and make it seamless because he's
So
very
that's a
good.
specialty. So there's icons on wood, small and different styles of wood and what's that
Canvas.
board they use?
Not canvas?
Or maybe canvas, I thought there was like certain kind of wood or a board, polyester, or I don't know. And then there's specialists that, I mean, because the proportions and the curvature of walls and you can't tell.
Right.
It's just unbelievable to me.
Right.
Yeah.
So this has got to be, I mean, maybe it's just time and talent and, experience or something. I mean,
I'm
it's
sure, yeah,
amazing
that's
to
a
me.
lot
and
of
then
that,
you
yeah.
look at Jesus in the dome with that huge face, and then the same face is on the icon, but much smaller proportion.
Right.
And you know who it is.
Right.
Mary's the same way.
Yeah.
Infant Jesus the same way. Anywhere in our church, and they're different. I mean, it's amazing to me how, because you were talking about proportions, and there's different proportions for the same individual in the same space, and you always can identify with him at least because
Yeah.
it's the same iconographer. I think that's why Father George, you talked about what did you say, unity or forgot what you said. There's it's the very first thing you said. There's something about the space, uniformity or something, right?
We could call it uniformity, yeah.
Okay.
Rhythm. You see- yeah,
It's very
rhythm.
important, and
Rhythm.
maybe you miss that if you have different iconographers come in and work side by side or something. But for this, there's you use the word, and it's very important for Father George. He needed that purity, or he wanted to walk into a space and you knew you were in the space and it all looks the same.
Mm-hmm.
Uniform,
Yeah.
but recognizable, like immediately recognizable, maybe.
Yeah, and apparently, Vlasios, our iconographer, his style is recognized all over the world in any church you walk into, and in America too. He's starting to do a lot in America. You know that was an iconography done by Vlasios.
Yeah.
So does this happen too?
Yeah, there's a little bit of each.
Independent.
Yeah, there is a. It should be, in my understanding, there should be a type of creativity, a little bit that comes out. You're going to see icons and you'll recognize who did them. Obviously, we have Rublev, we have
Yes.
Dionysius of Furna, this manual. You're going to see that. A little bit of you comes out in that art. It's inevitable. It's like making a sculpture. It's like, I can tell that's your chisel, that you chiseled that with. I was told a long time ago that the first icon you paint of Christ, you'll look at it and say, wow, that really looks like me. And it's true. You put yourself into this icon. You try to get away from that because it's not personal expression, but you can definitely tell that, yep, that's his, that's his icon. And there should be that allowance for creativity within the icon too, within iconography. It's not all, we have forms, we have to make things a certain way, we have to color things more or less a certain way, but there are little points where your own touch does come through and it is passable.
So do iconographers traditionally model the faces of the individuals, the historical individuals, from the way that you were talking about research, what has been done in the past? Or is there some freedom to, or have you ever heard of this, freedom to reconstruct what they feel? I know there's different periods of history where the icons kind of look at different, you still know who you're looking at, but they turn out a lot differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I know because I went to school with a friend of mine at the Holy Cross Seminary who was from St. Sophia Church in Los Angeles. It's a very famous
It's a big
church.
one, yeah.
It's built by people in the entertainment industry.
Mm-hmm.
And the iconographer, I don't know who it was, modeled the faces of particular individuals like Mary and the angels after famous movie stars.
Mm-hmm.
I think Rita Hayworth is up there. It's her face, and then his own children are the faces of the angels and stuff. So does this happen often, or is that like an anomaly? Like in our church, I think we have an anomaly too. You have real places depicted behind the evangelists in our church. I don't know if you see that anywhere else, but Vlasios was willing to do that. So maybe this was a special request, or is this frowned upon, or is this?
It depends on who you're talking to.
But because you said there's some creativity in
There is, but it's more in the way that you're constructing and using color and using light within the icon,
and light.
as it should be, and the rhythm, and how well you're
The
drawing
rhythm, that's
it.
the word you
Rhythm,
used.
yeah.
There's a rhythm, yeah.
If you're working in that language, and it requires some humility, because you can't, give someone an earring if you thought they wore an earring. So I'm not really sure. I've never seen those icons, but
You should check it out.
my gut reaction would be, yeah, I'd frown on that, probably. That's probably not a good idea, but there's just so much to draw anyways and paint from the old icons anyways that you can never get to contemporizing, So
Could
it's-
you enlighten us more about this rhythm? It's sort of like, it sounds like you walk into a church and are the icons supposed to put us in a rhythm, or what are you talking about?
No, it's more of a painter's term. For instance, rhythm and line. So I wanted to just real quick show, I was thinking we had an easel. down here, but we don't, it's okay.
We will next week.
But what I'll do is just kind of maybe hold it up for people to see.
Want me to hold it for you?
No, thanks, I'll fix it. It may be, is this a little blurry, can people see? But this is how I start an icon. It all starts with the egg. This is a male saint I'm going to draw on this side, it's a female saint on this. So, as basic proportions, it all starts with the egg. You draw a line down the center, and then these lines are the thirds which divide the face and give it proper proportions. So in this phase, you're still kind of sketching. Better icons used more of a sense of rhythm and movement in their icons to further bring that depicted person into communion with the viewer. Some icons you see, maybe, there are some really old Russian or Serbian icons which were done without a lot of outside influence. It became very austere and almost looked as if they were just sort of standing there. But look at good icons from the Paleologan period. And they almost seem to move with you as you're standing there. No matter where you go in the church, they're still looking at you. They keep your gaze. That's because of the way they're constructed. So they use some curved lines. I have a center axis here. There are specific proportions. The way you get to the top of the hair is generally about a nose length. We use nose lengths and head lengths as our form of measurement for the whole icon. It moves slightly. This one, in order to show movement, this face of St. George is going to be head moving this way and the gaze going slightly, ever so slightly this way. Just so that there's an interplay, there's a rhythm being between the way it's depicted. So that's what these other lines are here for, including this curved axis, which, when you put on the nose as an overlay, you can't really see it underneath here, but this curved axis is visible in here. There's a rhythm in the way that you draw the hair, for instance. It's hard to see here, but you're not drawing like a child would draw, like hair like this, An iconographer would probably draw hair something more like this, where it had a little bit of life to it. It looked a little bit more realistic, where it went from thick to thin. And again, this is to keep that rhythm going. There's a lot to this, and in a further session I could explain how we take a little skeleton here and bring it to there. But for the most part, there are elements within this icon which reference the lines below it. For instance, the eyes I have drawn on here, they are going this way a little bit. There's a slight curve this way. The face is wider on this side than it is on this to indicate it's going that way, and the gaze is going towards you, but slightly this way to give it rhythm. And the same thing with a female saint, which starts much in the same way with the egg, with a center line, and then these curved lines called transverse lines, which indicate and help you with movement. And that's where this ends up. This may be clear as simple as radar, but more or less, an iconographer is still drawing and painting with that particular rhythm in it. Lines should flow into one another, and often you have to work a drawing a lot in order to draw it. This is a sketch of Christ, just to show the 3/4 view as it progresses. And sometimes to save time, an iconographer will use a little tracing paper. These are the phases that it would go through in one setting, though. Keeping the rhythm and keeping the flow. It may be difficult to see, and I apologize. I'll find a better way to do that. But this is how I'd start an icon of Christ. So, again, you draw your center line. There's a center line that's put slightly off kilter, so that it's everything, the figure's entire movement, the body and face, is not on the same line. It's moved slightly to the right or left to indicate movement, that nothing is austere and just sort of like a picture, like just a flat thing, two-dimensional. Right. This is how we make it more three-dimensional, as it were. The nose, again, the head is divided into thirds, and then we use that nose length to generate the top of the hair, and also to make placement for where we will draw the shoulders. Roughly, the head and half a head is used generally to denote the body. So they all start with a box like this. Again, the arms, that's how we do those. Try to get everything together as one. Instead of piecemeal, instead of just drawing the head first really well and then putting some hands in it. Again, keeping with the rhythm and keeping in that unity, your focus is to kind of work on the whole icon as it is together. As a painter would work on a landscape to make it not just a pieces of something, but holistic. Kind of like life. So this is about approximately the second stage of drawing, where I'd add in these lines, starting to add in the gospel book, the particular way that Christ holds his blessing hand. Again, not something that's necessarily, say, canonical, but something that you do look at this, you do know this is Christ, because, you know, the gospel is here and his hand is here. So, and this is where you start working with rhythm. So as you're working through it, you're making these lines to indicate also volume on the surface. Since an icon is not just flat and two-dimensional, you start working in, over our skeleton, a lot of lines which indicate volume. So for instance, the side of an arm here, let's say that's our arm, will have lines that fit with it rhythmically so that you kind of know that it's curving. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Folds, and those are put in to give it a sense of, you know, that it is actually someone real and not a cardboard cutout.
Would you use the word parabola? Is it
Probably
parabola?
not.
No?
Yeah. I think just a general, like a volumetric curve would be more, yeah, like telling, but descriptive, I should say. So this is where that goes, and eventually it works its way to this particular face. And again, working with rhythm and trying to communicate that this is not only moving into communion with the viewer, but it is in itself, not perfect, but something as a whole that works together rhythmically, like a well-constructed song, or like a hymn of the church. And this is where this ends up. So now starting to flesh out details in the face. And again, making it wider on this side and on this.
Can I ask a question about expressions,
Please.
facial expressions? Because I feel like they're fairly uniform in most icons I've ever seen. All facial expressions are usually the same unless it's depicting a specific event. And it was explained to me one time that they're not necessarily meant to look like accurate to a real face, but that they have a longer nose and wider eyes and a smaller mouth to indicate certain things. So is that true for you when you're doing this?
Yeah, I try to maintain that, pay attention to that.
And the like the reasoning, like I don't remember what specifically like they said why, but can you explain that a little bit?
I personally think, I mean, that I in my mind try to keep it, like I said, sober, not austere, living, but to make too egregious of an expression would be outside of what you were trying to portray.
Yeah.
Because then that would bring it into not only your own personal touch, but it would also sort of bring it out of more into something that you're trying to express as a symbol instead of expressing something that is living, that is perfect, that is holy. Does that make sense?
That's why you don't see like smiling icons or teeth
Right.
and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. There's even some issue with other iconographers. I had a friend that had to paint a blind saint, and he was at wit's end, like for a couple of weeks, trying to decide, well, her eyes were closed, you know, most of the time because she was blind. You know, should I depict that or not? And that's a consideration that you make when you're going to make an icon, design one, draw one. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
How does prayer and fasting fit in to all what you're doing?
It fits in.
I mean, I know that people always say when an iconographer is drawing an icon or so, he has to be praying and fasting, and so, I mean, is there any particular prayers?
Well, I mean, and that's, you have to prepare yourself. You have to make an environment that facilitates that. Something prayerful, something quiet, yeah, you have to. You have to kind of go beyond your own desire a little bit to make the great icon or to make the most beautiful picture in the world. It's very humbling. It's almost crushing sometimes, to be honest with you. But it's just a part of what you do if you're good at it, But then again, I mean, I forget, you're a physician?
Respiratory therapist.
By trade. So, how does a respiratory therapist pray and fast? Where does prayer and fasting fit into your life? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something, people think iconographers are some kind of mystical dudes that live in a hut or something, And that's actually, well, monks do, obviously, but for the most part, that's not true. They're not any type of not sanctimonious people or something, you know what I mean? So, yeah, but you have to live, okay, so having said that, you have to live the life of the church.
Right.
You have to participate in that. That has to be your language, because it's like writing a song. Whatever you've been putting into your head is going to come out as that song. So if you've been listening to something not so positive, you're going to write a really depressing song. So that's the way I look at it.
So I have a question. Do you wash your hands before you paint?
I wash my hands. I just caught that. I was gonna say, well, I wash my hands. I try to wash my hands as many times as I can during the day. But yes, this is good. Yeah. I remember that now.
Thank you, Zach. Are you going to come back and continue to?
Yeah, I think next session I can come back. I've got
2 weeks.
2 weeks. Okay.
We can plan for a slideshow if you want to.
Okay.
We can
Yeah,
set it up.
Because we have a
Yeah.
screen and I have a projector, I mean, we can do that. We can
And this
find
way you
a
can
way
talk about the colors and maybe the.
Sure. Yeah. That would be next. It's such a broad subject that I was
Yeah.
just like, let's just
'Cause
dip
there's
a toe.
a lot of theology
It can
in
be, yeah.
iconography that
Yeah.
maybe would be interesting to have
It's,
you.
I love it. I think it's fascinating. It's like art history, but also theology and
Yeah.
yeah.
It belongs to you too, because you're a Christian, so it's your art history. You know what I mean? It's like a little more than that, right? So,
Father, can you say a prayer? So we can
Yes, absolutely.
pardon my mess.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs, bestowing life. Lord, we ask your blessing upon all those here at the Basilica, all those who are engaged in their desire to know you better and to come into a personal relationship with you through Scripture and through the beauty of the parish that they may be a member of, and through the icons. We ask that you always bless our homes and our families, and that you always allow us, to the best of our ability, seek your holy will for our own lives. For you are holy, always, now, and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all.
Thank you.